Hey beautiful souls. Are you ready for a journey from silence to symphony? From the shadows of shame to the light of unconditional love? Tonight, we're diving deep into a world where curses define destinies, where being different is considered a death sentence, and where the most broken souls sometimes hold the greatest power. I need you to buckle up because we're about to meet Elara, a wolfless girl whose very existence is considered a disgrace. But here's what I want you to remember as we begin. Sometimes the greatest strength doesn't roar, it whispers. Sometimes the most powerful magic isn't found in claws and fangs, but in courage and compassion. Are you with me? Then let's step into the Nightshade Pact territory, into a castle wrapped in shadows, and into the presence of a king who has forgotten what it means to be human. This is a story about two broken souls who will learn that love doesn't just heal, it transforms. Let's begin. Elara was a whisper in a world of roars. In the Nightshade Pact, where a wolf's strength was measured by the ferocity of its snarl and the power of its shift, she was a silent. The word itself was a condemnation, a brand of shame seared into her soul since the day of her first failed transformation. While other children had burst forth in a flurry of fur and youthful energy, she had remained stubbornly, disappointingly human. Her inner wolf, a hollow echo where a beast should have been. The rejection was a constant, cold companion. It lived in the averted gazes of the pack elders, in the pitying glances from her older sister Mirabelle, and in the bitter disappointment that permanently etched her father's face. Her family, once respected, had fallen into disgrace. Their lineage tainted by her perceived defect. They lived on the frayed edges of the territory in a cottage that sagged with the weight of their collective shame. Today the shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. The summons had arrived at dawn, a scroll bearing the obsidian seal of the Alpha King. It was not a request but a command. Every unmated female of shifting age was to present herself at the capital. The reason was unstated, but whispers slithered through the pack like smoke. King Theron, the Shadow King, was seeking a mate. The name alone was enough to chill the blood. He was a figure of terrifying legend. A king who had taken the throne after his parents' mysterious death and had ruled from the shadows of his fortress ever since. He never attended festivals, never walked among his people. He was a phantom king, his power absolute, his presence a constant, unseen threat. They said he was cruel, scarred, a monster who hid his face for a reason. "You must go," her father had said, his voice devoid of warmth. He had not looked at her. His eyes fixed on the chipped wood of their table. "It is the king's command. We cannot afford more dishonor." He meant she could not afford to bring them more dishonor. Her very existence was a stain, and defying a royal edict would be catastrophic. Mirabelle had helped her pack a small threadbare bag. Her sister was everything Elara was not, strong, beautiful. Her silver wolf, a magnificent creature that ran with the pack's finest hunters. Yet there was no malice in her, only a deep, sorrowful pity that was almost worse than contempt. "Be careful, Elara," Mirabelle had whispered, pressing a small hand-carved wooden bird into her palm. "The capital is not like our village. And the king, the stories are dark." Elara clutched the bird now, its smooth wood a small comfort as she stood in the crowded, muddy courtyard of the king's fortress. She was a drab sparrow in a flock of peacocks. The other females were dressed in their finest silks and velvets, their hair intricately braided with ribbons and jewels. They preened and postured, each one vying to be the most impressive, the most worthy. They were the daughters of alphas and betas, their bloodlines pure, their wolves strong. Elara wore a simple brown dress, patched at the elbows. She had no jewels, no ribbons. She felt invisible, and for that she was grateful. Her only hope was to be overlooked, dismissed, and sent home to her quiet life of being a disappointment in private. She kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the cracked cobblestones, trying to shrink into herself. The air crackled with a sudden tension. A hush fell over the chattering crowd. The great iron-banded doors of the keep swung open and two figures emerged. One was an older wolf, his face a mask of stern authority and disdain. His scent was sharp, aggressive. Lord Malachar, the king's uncle and most trusted advisor, a notorious traditionalist. The second figure stole the breath from every lung in the courtyard. It was the king. He was not what she had expected. The legends had painted a picture of a gnarled beast, a monster hunched and hideous. But Alpha King Theron was tall and powerfully built, draped in black furs that seemed to drink the very light from the air. A high ornate collar framed a face that was brutally handsome, all sharp angles and severe lines. His hair was as black as a moonless night, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, a piercing glacial gray that seemed to see everything and feel nothing. But there was something else. A strange cold emanated from him, a palpable aura of isolation and sorrow that clung to him like a shroud. Shadows seemed to deepen in his presence, to writhe at the edges of his form as if they were alive. Lord Malachar stepped forward. By decree of Alpha King Theron, a mate will be chosen. She who is selected will bring honor to her pack and secure the future of our kingdom. His gaze swept over the assembled females, dismissing Elara and the other lower-ranked wolves in an instant. The king did not speak. His stormy eyes scanned the crowd, his expression unreadable. He moved with a predator's grace, a silent lethal power that made the air thick with fear. One by one he passed the hopefuls, a flick of his gaze, a slight shake of his head, and their faces would fall, crestfallen. He dismissed the strongest, the most beautiful, the ones whose bloodlines were impeccable. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Elara held her breath, praying he would not see her. Please just pass me by. Let me go home. But then his movement stopped. He was standing before her. The world narrowed to the space between them. The cold radiating from him was intense, seeping into her bones. She could feel the raw, terrifying power thrumming just beneath his skin. She dared not look up, keeping her eyes fixed on the silver clasps of his boots. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The whispers of the crowd died. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, feel their shock and disbelief. Why had he stopped for the silent? The wolfless girl from a disgraced family. A deep voice, smoother and colder than she could have imagined, cut through the silence. You. The single word was a physical blow. Elara's head snapped up against her will. She met his gaze and her heart stuttered. The stories were wrong. He was not a monster. He was something far more terrifying, a man utterly broken, his soul encased in ice. She saw a flicker of something in those gray depths, not cruelty but a profound, bottomless pain. He looked at her not as a potential mate but as a tool. His gaze was assessing, calculating. He saw her patched dress, her lack of adornment, her cowering posture. He saw her weakness and for some reason she could not comprehend. That was what he wanted. He lifted a hand and she flinched, but he only gestured to Lord Malachar. A quiet word was exchanged, too low for her to hear. Malachar's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. He opened his mouth to protest, but a single glacial look from the king silenced him. Theron's gaze returned to Elara. His voice was a low command that brooked no argument, echoing in the dead silence of the courtyard. You are the one. You will come with me. Fear was a living thing, a frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. Elara followed the Alpha King into the oppressive gloom of his fortress. Her worn-out sandals slapping softly against the cold stone floors. Lord Malachar trailed behind them, his fury a palpable heat at her back. The great doors boomed shut, plunging the hall into a twilight, pierced only by high, narrow windows that let in slivers of gray, unforgiving light. The castle was a mausoleum. Tapestries depicting glorious battles of the past were coated in a fine layer of dust, their vibrant colors muted to shades of gray. Suits of armor stood like silent, rusting sentinels along the walls. There was no warmth, no life, no sound but their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. It was the home of a man who was already a ghost. King Theron led her not to a throne room or a grand hall, but up a winding staircase into what was clearly his private study. The room was dominated by a massive oak desk and shelves overflowing with books and scrolls. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to chase away the room's profound chill. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, wood smoke and something else, a faint metallic tang like ozone after a lightning strike. He gestured to a simple wooden chair before the desk, then moved to stand before the fireplace, his back to her. He was a looming silhouette against the flames. "My lord," Malachar began, his voice tight with outrage. "You cannot be serious. This girl, she is a silent. Her family is disgraced. She has no wolf, no standing, no power. She is an insult to our bloodline." Theron did not turn. "That is precisely why she was chosen." His voice was calm, but it held an undercurrent of steel that made Malachar flinch. "I require a maiden name only, a placeholder, someone who will not challenge me, who has no political ambitions of her own, whose family is too weak to leverage this union for their own gain. She is perfect." Elara's blood ran cold. A placeholder, a tool. She was not a person to him but a solution to a problem. The humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was overshadowed by a primal fear. "Leave us," the king commanded, his tone final. Malachar sputtered for a moment, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, but the king's authority was absolute. With a last venomous glare at Elara, the old wolf spun on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Elara sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap. The small wooden bird Mirabelle had given her digging into her palm. Finally Theron turned from the fire. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold control. He walked towards the desk and sat opposite her, the massive piece of furniture a barricade between them. "Let us be clear about the nature of this arrangement," he began, his voice low and even. "You will be my queen. You will live in this castle. You will attend the necessary functions, and you will present a convincing illusion of a mated pair to the world. You will be given fine clothes, warm food and a comfortable life. In return you will be obedient, discreet and you will ask no questions." Her throat was dry. And what of the bond, the mating?" The words felt like ash in her mouth. A flicker of something dark and dangerous crossed his face. "There will be no bond. There will be no consummation. This is a political arrangement, nothing more." He leaned forward slightly, his storm-gray eyes pinning her in place. The cold in the room intensified and she saw them then, faint, wispy tendrils of shadow coiling around his shoulders, like smoke with a mind of its own. They seemed to react to his emotions, darkening and thickening with the grimness of his tone. "I have one condition," he said, and his voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound more menacing than any shout. "It is the most important rule of this entire charade, and if you break it the consequences will be severe. Do you understand?" She could only nod, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You will never touch me." The words hung in the air between them, stark and absolute. Her heart, which had been racing with fear, seemed to stop altogether for a moment before lurching back into a painful rhythm. Of all the things she had expected, this was not it. In their culture, the mating touch was sacred, the foundation of the bond that united a pair for life. To forbid it was unnatural, a violation of their deepest instincts. "Ever," he reiterated, his gaze burning with an intensity that terrified her. "Under no circumstances are you to lay a hand on me, and you will ensure that I never ever touch you. Is that clear?" "Yes, my king," she whispered, the title feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. He seemed to see the confusion and fear in her eyes because a sliver of something that might have been weariness crossed his features. "This is for your own protection," he said, the words clipped. "This castle is my cage, girl. Do not forget that you are now in it with me." With that, he stood, the audience clearly over. "A servant will show you to your chambers. They are in the opposite wing from my own. You will be brought what you need." He turned his back on her again, returning to his vigil by the fire, a solitary king guarding a secret she could not begin to comprehend. The shadows around him seemed to cling to him, a living cloak of darkness. Elara felt a strange, unwelcome pang of sympathy for the lonely, powerful man before her. It was quickly smothered by the overwhelming terror of her new reality. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, mated to a king who refused to touch her, a queen in name only. Her life was no longer her own. It belonged to the Shadow King, and to the terrible secret reason he had for his one unbreakable condition. Elara's new chambers were as grand as they were desolate. They were a suite of rooms larger than her entire family cottage, furnished with a huge canopy bed, a velvet fainting couch, and a wardrobe filled with gowns of silk and brocade in colors she had only ever dreamed of. But like the rest of the castle, a film of disuse lay over everything. The air was stale, the furniture shrouded in a ghostly layer of dust. No one had lived here for a very long time. The days that followed bled into one another in a haze of suffocating loneliness. She saw the king only at the evening meal, a tense, silent affair in a cavernous dining hall. They sat at opposite ends of a long polished table. The distance between them a yawning chasm. He never spoke, his attention fixed on his plate, his posture rigid. The shadows were always with him, faint wisps that coiled at his collar and cuffs, a constant, unsettling reminder of his strangeness. The rule, "Never touch me," was a silent third guest at their table every night. The castle staff treated her with a fearful deference. They were ghosts themselves, moving with quiet efficiency, their eyes always downcast. They answered her questions with clipped, polite responses, but offered no warmth, no conversation. She was their queen, but she was also the king's property, and they were clearly terrified of him. Desperate for a breath of fresh air, for something real and alive in this stone tomb, Elara began to explore. She found her way to the castle's courtyard gardens, or what was left of them. They had once been magnificent, she could tell. The layout was intricate, with stone pathways, tiered flower beds, and the skeleton of a large glass conservatory. But now it was a riot of neglect. Weeds choked the life from withered rose bushes. Ivy crawled unchecked over statues, and the conservatory glass was cracked and grimy. It was a reflection of the king himself, she thought, something that had once held the promise of beauty, now left to ruin and decay. Elara had always had a gift, a secret she kept, even from her family. It wasn't the strength of a wolf, but a quieter magic. She could feel the life force in plants, a gentle hum beneath the earth. She could coax seeds to sprout with a touch, could soothe the blight from a wilting leaf. It was a useless skill in a pack of warriors and hunters, another mark of her otherness. But here, in this dead garden, it felt like a purpose. She started small. She found a pair of rusted shears in a forgotten shed and began to clear the weeds from a single rose bush. Her fingers, unused to such labor, were quickly raw and blistered, but she ignored the pain. As she worked, she hummed an old lullaby her mother used to sing, a simple, gentle tune. She focused on the tiny spark of life still lingering in the rose's roots, sending a silent, wordless encouragement to it. Live, she pleaded with it. Grow. She lost track of time, her world shrinking to the patch of dirt and the thorny stems in her hands. It was the first time she had felt anything other than fear and loneliness since arriving at the castle. From a high-shadowed window in his study, Theron watched her. He had been drawn by the faint, unfamiliar sound of humming. He stood back from the glass, a phantom observer, his hands clenched behind his back. He had expected her to weep, to rage, to grow sullen and bitter in her confinement. He had not expected this. He watched as the wolfless girl knelt in the dirt, her fine new dress stained with mud, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tended to a plant that was all but dead. He watched for hours. He saw the way she spoke to the plants in a low whisper, the gentle way she cleared the weeds as if not to disturb the soil too much. There was a quiet strength in her, a stubborn resilience that he had not anticipated. It was an unwelcome complication. She was supposed to be a simple, inanimate pawn. She was not supposed to be interesting. A sudden spike of anger from his uncle's unwanted visit earlier in the day caused a flicker in his control. A tendril of pure shadow, darker and colder than the rest, snaked down his arm. He clenched his fist, forcing it back under his skin. The curse was always there, a hungry beast waiting for a moment of weakness. His isolation was his only defense. His control was the only thing keeping everyone around him safe. He looked back down at the girl in the garden. She was life in his world of death, a small, stubborn flower pushing its way through cracked stone. And for the first time in a very long time, Theron felt a flicker of something other than pain and rage. It was a dangerous, unfamiliar emotion, curiosity. He continued to watch her day after day. The single rose bush became a small patch of cleared earth. The patch grew into a bed. She found seeds in the conservatory and with painstaking care began to coax them to life in small clay pots. Life was slowly, stubbornly returning to his dead garden, all because of the silent, wolfless girl he had chosen for her weakness. One evening, as she was returning from the garden, her arms full of freshly cut, fragrant herbs she'd discovered, she almost ran into him in a dimly lit corridor. She gasped and stumbled back, dropping the herbs. The scent of lavender and mint filled the air. "My king," she stammered, her eyes wide with panic as she scrambled to gather the scattered stems. He stood perfectly still, his body rigid. The unexpected proximity, the fresh, clean scent of the herbs, it was an assault on his tightly controlled senses. The shadows around him thickened, a visible sign of his agitation. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice harsher than he intended. "The gardens," she whispered, not looking at him. "They were neglected. I thought I could help." He looked at her hands. They were covered in dirt, the nails broken, the knuckles scraped. They were the hands of a worker, not a queen. "You are the queen. This is not your work." "It makes me feel less alone," she confessed, the words so quiet he barely heard them. Her honesty disarmed him. He had spent his entire life building walls, and this small, quiet girl was finding the cracks in them without even trying. He felt an irrational urge to reach out, to brush a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The thought was so alarming, so dangerous that he recoiled as if burned. The shadows around him writhed. "Stay away from me," he snarled, the words a desperate defense. He did not wait for a reply, turning and stalking away down the corridor, his black cloak billowing behind him like a storm cloud. Elara was left kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the scent of lavender, her heart aching with a confusion she couldn't name. She had seen it again in his eyes, just for a second. Not anger but pure, unadulterated fear. The Shadow King, the monster of the legends, was afraid, and she was beginning to think he was not afraid of her, but of himself. The encounter in the hallway shifted the atmosphere in the castle from one of silent tension to one of active avoidance. Theron made himself even scarcer, taking his meals in his study and ensuring their paths never crossed. Yet Elara knew he was still watching her. Sometimes when she was in the garden, she would feel a prickling on the back of her neck and would glance up at the high dark window of his study, catching a glimpse of a silhouette just before it disappeared. Her work in the garden became her sanctuary. Under her care, a miracle was unfolding. The rose bushes, once skeletal and brown, were now covered in lush green leaves and heavy with buds. The herb garden was thriving, its fragrance a gentle rebellion against the castle's musty decay. She had even managed to repair some of the panes in the conservatory, and inside, tiny seedlings were pushing their way toward the light. The castle staff began to notice. One of the kitchen maids, a young woman named Brielle, shyly approached her one afternoon. "Your Majesty," she began, her eyes downcast. The head cook was wondering, "Might we use some of your herbs? We haven't had fresh lavender in the kitchen since, well, for a long time." Elara's heart lifted. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her about something other than her immediate needs. "Of course," she said, her smile genuine. "Take whatever you need." Soon, small changes began to ripple through the fortress. The scent of fresh herbs drifted from the kitchens. A maid timidly placed a small vase of Elara's roses on the dining hall table. The food, once bland and functional, became more flavorful. They were small things, but in the oppressive stillness of the castle, they felt monumental. Life was seeping back into the stone walls, and it was flowing from her. The shift did not go unnoticed by Lord Malachar. He saw her growing influence as a threat. He found her in the garden one morning where she was carefully transplanting young chamomile sprouts. "Enjoying your little hobby, are we?" he sneered, his presence casting a pall over the sunny morning. He kicked at a loose stone on the path. "You should be focused on your duties, on providing the king with an heir." Elara stiffened, her hands freezing in the dirt. "The king has not. That is not part of our arrangement." Malachar laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "An arrangement, child? You are a broodmare, a deficient one at that. But your purpose is to secure the bloodline. Has he even touched you? Or does his affliction prevent it?" The insinuation was slick with venom. "I do not know what you mean," Elara said, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Do not play the fool with me," he snarled, stepping closer. His scent was acrid, domineering. "I have known him since he was a boy. I know his weakness. This curse he carries, this shadow play, it is a taint on our family. A king must be strong, pure. He hides in his castle, afraid of his own power. He chose you, a wolfless stray, because he is too weak to handle a real she-wolf. He thinks you are too powerless to expose him." Malachar leaned down, his face close to hers. "But you will be his undoing. A queen who cannot give him an heir is useless. And a king who cannot produce one is no king at all. The council is already whispering. Your failure will be his downfall, and I will be there to pick up the pieces." He straightened up, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Tend to your flowers, little queen. It is all you are good for." He strode away, leaving Elara kneeling in the dirt, his poisonous words echoing in her mind. So it was a curse, a physical affliction that explained the shadows, the cold, the desperate rule of no touching. He was afraid of harming someone. He was afraid of what he was. Instead of frightening her, the revelation solidified the strange sympathy she felt for Theron. His cruelty was a shield. His isolation was a prison he had built to protect others. Malachar saw it as a weakness to be exploited. But Elara was beginning to see it as a terrible, lonely sacrifice. That night she decided to act. She couldn't fight Malachar with power or politics. But she had her own quiet magic. She spent hours in the herb garden, carefully selecting plants known for their calming properties: chamomile, valerian root, and a rare silvery leaf called moon petal, said to soothe troubled spirits. She brewed a fragrant, steaming tea, her intentions focused and clear as she stirred the infusion. "Peace," she thought. "Let him have a moment of peace." She brought the tray to his study herself, ignoring the startled look from the guard at the door. She knocked softly. "Go away," came the gruff reply. She took a deep breath. "My king, I have brought you some tea. I thought it might help you rest." There was a long silence. "Then leave it outside the door." "It will get cold," she insisted gently. Another pause, longer this time. She heard the scrape of a chair, then heavy footsteps. The door opened a crack. Theron's stormy eyes peered out, narrowed and suspicious. The shadows around him were agitated, writhing like a nest of snakes. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He saw the simple porcelain cup on the tray, steam rising from it in a fragrant cloud. He looked at her earnest, worried face. No one had dared to approach his study at night for years. No one had ever brought him something they thought might bring him comfort. With a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he opened the door wider. Fine. She entered the room, her heart pounding. She placed the tray on a small table near his desk. The room was a mess, scrolls and books scattered everywhere, a testament to a restless, troubled mind. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rough. "It is just tea," she said softly. "Chamomile and moon petal. It helps to calm the mind." She did not say the shadows, but he knew what she meant. He stared at the cup as if it might be poisoned. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted his power, who saw him as a title, not a person. Malachar's machinations, the council's demands, the fear in his subjects' eyes, it was a constant siege. And here was this girl offering a simple cup of tea, an act of pure, uncomplicated kindness. He did not thank her. He did not smile. He simply walked over to the table, picked up the cup and took a sip. His eyes closed for a brief moment. The tense line of his jaw softened almost imperceptibly. The writhing shadows around his shoulders seemed to calm, settling into a gentle, flowing cloak. He looked at her, and for the first time his gaze held no anger, no calculation, only a profound, soul-deep weariness. "You should not have come here. You seem troubled," she whispered. "I am always troubled," he stated, a flat, bitter truth. He took another sip of the tea. This was a foolish risk. "I am not afraid of you," she said, and was surprised to find that it was true. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "Then you are a fool." He turned away from her then, dismissing her with his posture, but as she slipped out of the room, she saw him lift the cup to his lips again. A solitary king finding a fleeting moment of peace in a simple gift from his placeholder queen. It was a tiny victory, but it felt like the beginning of a thaw in his long, cold winter. The nightly tea ritual became an unspoken agreement. Every evening, Elara would brew a calming infusion and bring it to his study. She would knock. He would let her in and she would place the tray on the table. Sometimes he would be there and they would exist in a shared, tense silence for a few moments. Other times he would be absent, and she would leave the tea for him to find. He never thanked her, but he always drank it. The empty cup left outside his door in the morning was her only acknowledgement. This fragile truce was shattered during a meeting of the royal council. As the new queen, Elara's presence was required, a symbolic necessity. She sat on a smaller, less ornate throne beside Theron's, feeling like an imposter in her borrowed finery. The council was composed of old, grim-faced alphas from the most powerful packs, with Lord Malachar at their head. The topic was a border dispute with a clan of rogue wolves to the north. Malachar was advocating for an immediate, brutal retaliation. "We must show strength," he boomed, slamming a fist on the great stone table. "They encroach on our lands, steal our game. We must wipe them out. Burn their dens to the ground as a warning to all others." Several of the other alphas grunted in agreement. It was the old way, the way of blood and dominance. Theron listened, his face an impassive mask. But Elara, who was growing attuned to the subtle shifts in his demeanor, saw the tightening of his jaw. She could see the shadows around him stirring, growing darker. "A full-scale attack will cost us too many warriors," Theron stated, his voice a low counterpoint to Malachar's roar. "The rogues are desperate. Their lands are barren after the long winter. A show of force will only make them fight harder. It will be a bloody, protracted war. They are vermin," Malachar spat. "And weakness only invites more aggression. Your father would have already sent the war packs. Or has his son forgotten how to be a true alpha?" The jab was personal and it struck its mark. A visible tremor went through Theron. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The shadows around him exploded outwards, no longer faint wisps but thick, inky tendrils that snaked across the floor and up the walls. The torches in their sconces flickered wildly, casting dancing, monstrous shapes. The council members recoiled in terror, their chairs scraping against the stone as they scrambled back. They had heard whispers of the king's affliction, but to see it unleashed was something else entirely. Fear scented the air, thick and cloying. "You dare question my strength, uncle?" Theron's voice was no longer human. It was a low, resonant growl, layered with 100 whispering, spectral echoes. His eyes glowed with a faint silvery light. Malachar had gone too far and he knew it. He was pale, but a smug, triumphant look lingered in his eyes. This was what he wanted, for everyone to see the monster he believed Theron to be. The shadows thrashed, lashing out like whips. One shot towards Malachar, who cringed back, raising his arms to shield his face. The other alphas were frozen in terror, their bravado gone, replaced by primal fear. Elara's heart pounded. But it was not with fear for herself. She saw Theron not as a monster but as a man in agony, his control shattered, his curse raging. She saw the self-loathing and despair in his glowing eyes. Everyone else was backing away from him, but Elara stood up, ignoring the gasps of the council. She walked calmly from the dais. She moved not towards Theron, but towards a small table where a pitcher of water and goblets sat. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She poured a glass of water and walked to where she kept a small pouch of dried herbs at her belt. She crushed a handful of lavender and moon petal into her palm, the familiar, soothing scent rising into the air. She walked towards the center of the room, into the maelstrom of writhing shadows. They recoiled from her, hissing like steam on ice, but they did not touch her. Her lack of fear, her serene calm was anathema to the raging, chaotic energy. "My king," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the spectral whispers. "Theron." He was panting, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his throne. His glowing eyes were fixed on her, a maelstrom of pain and fury. "They do not understand," she said softly, continuing to approach. "They see a monster because they are afraid. But I am not afraid." She held out her hand, palm up, showing him the crushed herbs. "This is not a weakness. It is a part of you. You do not have to fight it alone." The scent of the herbs reached him, a familiar comfort in the midst of his inner turmoil. Her voice, her calm, her impossible courage, it was an anchor in the storm. He focused on her, on the impossible sight of her walking through the deadly manifestations of his curse as if strolling through a garden. Slowly, painfully, the shadows began to recede. They bled back towards him, shrinking from their terrifying forms into the familiar wisps that clung to his clothes. The unnatural cold in the room lessened. The torches burned steadily once more. Theron slumped back in his throne, the silver glow fading from his eyes, leaving them dull with exhaustion. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. He had pulled back from the edge, but it had taken everything he had. And her. It had taken her. The council stared, dumbfounded. They had just witnessed the king lose control and become a terrifying spectacle. But they had also witnessed the wolfless, silent queen walk into the heart of that storm and tame it with nothing but a few herbs and quiet words. Malachar's face was a mask of thwarted fury. His plan had backfired spectacularly. He had meant to expose Theron as a monster, but instead the event had somehow revealed a strange, powerful connection between the king and his unassuming mate. Theron's eyes met Elara's across the room. The vulnerability in them was raw, stark. He had been laid bare in front of his council, his deepest, most shameful secret exposed. But for the first time, someone had seen the monster and had not run. She had walked towards it. Without another word, he stood on shaky legs and swept from the room, the doors slamming shut behind him with a deafening boom. The council was left in stunned silence, their gazes shifting from the door he had disappeared through to the small, quiet queen who had just saved them all. Elara stood her ground, her heart aching for him, knowing that this revelation had changed everything. The council chamber emptied slowly, the alphas departing in hushed, urgent whispers. They glanced back at Elara with expressions that ranged from newfound respect to superstitious fear. Some bowed their heads to her as they passed, a gesture of acknowledgement they had never offered before. She was no longer just the wolfless placeholder. She was something they couldn't quite name, and that made her both fascinating and terrifying. Lord Malachar was the last to leave. He paused at the doorway, his eyes boring into her with undisguised hatred. "This changes nothing," he hissed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "A moment of calm does not erase years of instability. The council will see reason eventually. And when they do, you will fall with him." Elara met his gaze steadily, drawing on a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "You're wrong, Lord Malachar. This changes everything." They saw their king vulnerable and fighting for control. But they also saw him succeed. They saw him choose restraint over destruction. That is true strength, not the brutality you advocate. Malachar's lip curled in contempt. "Naive child. You know nothing of ruling, nothing of the harsh realities of power." "Perhaps not," she said softly. "But I know something of compassion. Something of love. And those are powers you will never understand." For a moment, something flickered in the old wolf's eyes, surprise perhaps or grudging respect. But it was quickly consumed by his rage. He turned and stalked out without another word, his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Elara stood alone in the vast council chamber, her legs trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. She sank back into the queen's throne, her breath coming in shaky gasps. What she had just done, walking into that storm of shadows, should have terrified her. By all rights she should be dead or driven mad. But something in her had known, had understood with absolute certainty, that Theron would never truly hurt her. Even in his darkest moment, even when the curse raged through him like wildfire, some part of him had been fighting to protect her. She thought of him now, alone in his study, drowning in shame and self-loathing. The image broke her heart. Rising on unsteady feet, Elara made her way through the castle corridors. The servants she passed stopped and stared, their faces showing a mixture of awe and fear. Word had already spread. It always did in a place like this. By nightfall, every soul in the kingdom would know what had transpired in the council chamber. She went first to the kitchens, where she found Brielle and the other maids huddled together, speaking in low, urgent voices. They fell silent when she entered, dropping into hurried curtsies. "Your Majesty," Brielle breathed, her eyes wide. "Is it true? Did you really—" "I need my herbs," Elara interrupted gently. "The chamomile, the moon petal, and—" She paused, thinking. "Do we have any nightshade root?" "The purple variety, carefully measured." The head cook, a broad woman with flour-dusted hands, stepped forward. "Nightshade, Your Majesty? That's a powerful herb. Dangerous in the wrong amounts." "I know what I'm doing," Elara said, more confidently than she felt. "It helps to ground intense emotions, to anchor the spirit. He needs it." The cook studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "In the far pantry top shelf. I'll fetch it for you." As Elara waited, Brielle approached her tentatively. "Your Majesty, if I may, what you did today. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. The king, he's been alone for so long. Ever since the tragedy with his parents. We all feared him, kept our distance. But you see something in him that the rest of us are too blind to see." Elara's throat tightened with emotion. "He's not a monster. He's a man carrying an impossible burden. And he's been carrying it alone for far too long." The cook returned with the nightshade root, wrapped carefully in cloth. 3 drops of the essence, no more," she warned. "Too much and it becomes a poison." 3 drops, Elara repeated, accepting the package. "Thank you." She spent the next hour in her chambers, brewing a tea more complex than any she had made before. The chamomile and moon petal formed the base, calming, soothing. The nightshade essence, added with careful precision, would ground him, anchor his spirit to the present moment. She also added a touch of wild rose for its properties of emotional healing, and a sprinkle of sage for clarity of mind. As she stirred the mixture, she hummed that same old lullaby, pouring her intentions into the brew. Strength. Forgiveness. Most of all, self-forgiveness. When the tea was ready, she carried it to his study on a silver tray. The guards at his door looked at her with new respect, stepping aside without question. She knocked softly. No answer came. "Theron," she called, using his name rather than his title. "Please. Let me in." Silence stretched. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, "I could have killed you." Her heart clenched. "But you didn't." "I wanted to. The curse wanted to." "You felt it, that moment when the shadow turned on you." "I barely held it back." "But you did hold it back," she insisted, her voice firm. "That's what matters. You chose to protect me even when it meant destroying yourself. That's not weakness, Theron. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed." More silence. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened and Elara's breath caught. Theron stood in the doorway, but he looked nothing like the formidable king who had swept from the council chamber. He looked broken. His black hair was disheveled, his eyes hollow and rimmed with red. The shadows around him were subdued, clinging to him like wounded things. "You should hate me," he said, his voice raw. "You should run as far from me as your legs can carry you." "I know," she said simply. "But I won't." She stepped past him into the study. The room was in disarray, books thrown from shelves, papers scattered across the floor, a chair overturned. Evidence of his internal struggle after the council meeting. She set the tea tray on the one clear space on his desk and turned to face him. "Sit," she commanded gently. "Drink." He stared at her as if she were some mythical creature he couldn't quite believe was real. Then, like a man in a daze, he moved to his desk and sank into his chair. He looked at the steaming cup. "What did you put in it this time?" "Things to help you," she said. "Things to ground you. To help you forgive yourself." His laugh was bitter. "There is no forgiveness for what I am. For what I've done." "Then tell me," she said, pulling the overturned chair upright and sitting across from him. "Tell me everything. Let me decide for myself what is unforgivable." Dear listener, if Elara's courage has stirred something within you, if you felt the weight of Theron's burden as your own, then don't let this moment slip away. Subscribe now, because what comes next will test the very foundations of their fragile bond. The revelation Theron is about to share will change everything Elara thought she knew, and the true danger lurking in the shadows has only just begun to show its face. The next chapter holds secrets that will shatter your heart and remake it anew. Subscribe and walk with us deeper into the darkness, toward the light that only love can kindle. Later that night, a profound silence settled over the castle, heavier and more complete than usual. Theron had finally begun to speak, his words coming slowly at first, then faster, as if a dam had burst within him. "I was 16, he began, his gaze fixed on the teacup in his hands. "Young, arrogant, full of the righteousness that only youth can possess. My father was grooming me to take over the throne, but he was harsh, demanding. Nothing I did was ever good enough. My mother tried to soften his edges, to be the buffer between us, but she was frail. Her health had been failing for years." Elara listened in silence, her heart aching for the boy he had been. "The curse manifests at the first shift," Theron continued. "It's been in our bloodline for 7 generations, passed from firstborn son to firstborn son. My great-great-great-grandfather made a bargain with a dark entity, a shadow spirit from the void between worlds. He wanted power, wanted to ensure that his line would rule forever. The spirit granted him strength beyond measure, the ability to command shadows, to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. But there was a price. His hands trembled, and the shadows around him pulsed in rhythm with his distress. The curse feeds on strong emotions. Anger, fear, grief, they all fuel it. And the stronger the emotion, the more powerful and uncontrollable it becomes. Physical touch amplifies it exponentially. That's why I can never. That's why you forbade me to touch you," Elara finished softly. He nodded. "When I had my first shift, the curse awakened. I had argued with my father that morning. He had berated me in front of the entire court, called me weak, unworthy of the throne. The rage I felt, it was consuming. That night when the shift took me, the shadows came with it. They erupted from me like a tidal wave. I had no training, no understanding of what was happening. My parents came to my chambers, heard me screaming." His voice broke, and Elara saw tears tracking down his face, glinting in the firelight. "They tried to help me. My mother took my hand trying to calm me and—" He choked on the words. "The moment she touched me, the curse latched onto her. It poured into her through our connection, draining her life force to feed its hunger. My father tried to pull her away and it took him too. By the time I regained control, they were... He couldn't finish. He didn't need to." Elara felt tears streaming down her own face. "Oh, Theron. I killed them," he said flatly. "I murdered my own parents. The official story was that they died in an accident, a hunting incident. Malachar helped cover it up, not out of kindness, but because the scandal would have destroyed the royal line. He's held it over me ever since, using it to control me, to manipulate me. And he's right to. I am a monster. I am everything he says I am." "No," Elara said fiercely. "You were a boy. A terrified boy who didn't understand what was happening to him. It was an accident, a tragedy, but it wasn't murder." "Doesn't matter," he said bitterly. "The result is the same. They're dead because of me. And I've spent every day since trying to atone, trying to ensure it never happens again. That's why I've isolated myself. That's why I chose you, someone with no connection to me, someone I couldn't possibly care for. I thought if I kept everyone at a distance, if I never allowed myself to feel anything, the curse would remain dormant. But it doesn't work that way, does it?" Elara asked gently. "You can't stop feeling. You're not a monster, Theron. You're human. Or wolf. Or whatever we are. And humans feel. We hurt. We grieve. We rage. And apparently we love." He looked up at her sharply. Don't say that. You can't." "Why not?" she challenged. "Because you're afraid? Because you think you'll hurt me? You had every opportunity today. The curse was fully unleashed, more powerful than I've ever seen it. And yet, even in that state, even when it wanted to destroy everything in its path, You held it back from me. You turned it on yourself rather than risk harming me. That was luck, he insisted. Luck and nothing more. It wasn't luck, she said. It was choice. It was love, Theron. Whether you want to admit it or not. He stood abruptly, turning away from her, his shoulders rigid. You don't understand. If I allow myself to care for you, if I let down my guard even for a moment, the curse will sense it. It will use that connection against us. It will try to destroy you to hurt me. That's how it works. That's why every one of my ancestors who bore this curse died alone and miserable. They couldn't risk loving anyone. Then they were cowards, Elara said, standing as well. They let the curse win. They let it dictate their entire existence. But you don't have to. Today proved that. Today proved nothing, he said harshly. Today was a fluke, a moment of. Today proved that you're stronger than the curse, she interrupted. That when you have something, someone, to fight for, you can control it. Don't you see? Isolation isn't making you stronger. It's making you weaker. The curse thrives on loneliness, on despair. Every day you spend locked away in this castle, cutting yourself off from everyone and everything, you're feeding it. You're giving it exactly what it wants. He spun to face her. And what would you have me do? Risk your life? Risk the lives of everyone in this castle on the gamble that I can control a force that has destroyed everyone who came before me? Yes, she said simply. Because the alternative is to keep living like this. Half alive, half dead. A ghost haunting your own castle. Is that really living, Theron? Is that the life your parents would have wanted for you? The question hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, his hand gripping the edge of his desk for support. Don't bring them into this. Why not? She pressed, moving closer. They loved you. Despite everything, despite the curse, they came to help you that night. They didn't abandon you even when it cost them everything. Do you really think they would want you to spend the rest of your life alone, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault? It was my fault, he insisted, but his voice was weaker now, less certain. It was the curse's fault, she corrected. It was the fault of your ancestor who made that dark bargain. It was the fault of a system that never taught you how to control it, how to live with it. But it wasn't your fault, Theron. You were a victim that night just as much as they were. He sank back into his chair, his face in his hands. I don't know how to live any other way. This isolation, it's all I've known for so long. It's all I am now. Elara moved around the desk and very carefully, very deliberately, placed her hand on his shoulder. He flinched, his head snapping up. Elara, no. Shoo, she soothed. Just breathe. Focus on me. On this moment. The shadows around him stirred, but they didn't lash out. She felt the cold seeping into her palm, felt the chaotic energy swirling just beneath his skin. But she also felt something else, warmth. His warmth, fighting to surface through the ice. I'm not afraid, she whispered. I trust you. You shouldn't, he said, but he didn't pull away. But I do. They stayed like that for a long moment, her hand on his shoulder, his eyes locked with hers. The shadows continued to swirl, but they remained controlled, contained. Slowly, tentatively, he reached up and placed his hand over hers. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, not of pain but of connection. Elara gasped as she felt his emotions flood through her. The grief, the guilt, the loneliness. But also, buried deep beneath all that pain, something else. Something warm and bright and achingly fragile. Oh. You see, she whispered. You can do this. We can do this. Together. He turned his hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. His skin was cold, but it was warming degree by degree. The shadows around them began to change, becoming less chaotic, more purposeful. They wove between them like silk threads, connecting rather than dividing. I don't deserve you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Probably not, she agreed with a small smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. For the first time since she'd met him, Theron laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but it was real. And it was beautiful. You're insufferable, he said, but there was no heat in the words. So I've been told, she replied. He pulled her gently toward him and she came willingly, settling onto his lap. His arms wrapped around her waist, holding her close. She could feel his heart beating against her back, could feel the rise and fall of his breath. The shadows enveloped them both, but they were warm now, protective rather than threatening. This is dangerous, he murmured into her hair. I know. If I lose control, you won't. You can't know that. Maybe not, she admitted. But I believe in you. And sometimes faith is more powerful than certainty. They sat in silence for a while, simply holding each other. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light through the study windows. For the first time in years, the Shadow King's study felt less like a prison and more like a refuge. "Tell me about them," Elara said softly. "Your parents. What were they like?" Theron tensed, then slowly relaxed. "My father was stern, but he was fair. He loved his people, loved this kingdom. He wanted to make it strong, prosperous. Sometimes he pushed too hard, demanded too much, but his heart was in the right place." "And your mother?" A smile touched his lips. "She was gentle. Kind. She loved the gardens, the ones you've been restoring. She spent every free moment out there tending to the flowers. She used to say that a kingdom was like a garden. It needed careful attention, patience, and love to flourish. My father thought it was nonsense, but he indulged her because he adored her." "She sounds wonderful," Elara said. "She was. She would have liked you, I think. You remind me of her in some ways. That quiet strength. That stubborn determination to see the good in things." "What happened to the gardens after she died?" "I couldn't bear to look at them," he admitted. "Every flower, every plant reminded me of her. Of what I'd taken from the world. So I let them die. Let everything die. It seemed fitting." "But they're not dead," Elara said. "Not completely. That's the thing about life, Theron. It's resilient. It endures. Even in the darkest places, even when everything seems lost, life finds a way. Just like your mother's roses. They were waiting all this time for someone to believe in them again." "Like me," he said quietly. "Like you," she agreed. They talked deep into the night, sharing stories, sharing pain, sharing hope. It was the most either of them had spoken in years, and it felt like a dam breaking, like poison being drawn from a wound. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, they were both exhausted but lighter, as if some great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. "You should rest," Theron said, though he made no move to release her. "So should you." "I don't want to let you go," he confessed. "Then don't." He carried her to the large couch by the fire, settling them both among the cushions. She curled against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. The shadows formed a blanket over them, warm and soft. "Elara," he murmured. "Hmm? Thank you." "For what?" "For not running. For not giving up on me. For seeing me." She turned her head to press a kiss to his jaw. "Always." As they drifted off to sleep, the sun rising over the kingdom, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the doorway. Lord Malachar stood in the shadows of the corridor, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. The Wolfless girl was changing everything. She was undoing years of his careful manipulation, years of keeping Theron isolated and controllable. If she succeeded in helping him master the curse, if she made him strong and confident, then Malachar's plans would crumble to dust. He couldn't allow that. He turned and stalked down the corridor, his mind already working on a new plan. If he couldn't turn the council against Theron directly, then he would have to find another way. A more permanent way. The Wolfless Queen would have to die. But it would have to look like an accident. Or better yet, it would have to look like Theron's fault. Yes, that was perfect. If he could engineer a situation where Theron's curse killed her, where the king's worst fears came true, it would destroy him completely. Break him so thoroughly that he would have no choice but to step down, to hand the throne over to someone more suitable. Malachar smiled, a cold, cruel expression. He had been patient for years. He could be patient a little longer. He would wait for the perfect opportunity and then he would strike. The Shadow King and his Wolfless Queen wouldn't even see it coming. In the days that followed, a transformation began to sweep through the castle and the kingdom beyond. Word of what had happened in the council chamber spread like wildfire, and with it came a shift in how the people viewed their king. They had spent years fearing him, seeing him as a monster locked away in his fortress. But now they heard stories of a queen who had walked into darkness without hesitation, who had faced down the shadows themselves to save her king. They heard that the king had fought the curse, had won against it, choosing protection over destruction. It was the stuff of legends, the kind of story that would be told around fires for generations to come. The common folk began to see Theron differently. When he rode through the marketplace with Elara at his side, still maintaining a respectful distance but clearly connected, they no longer averted their eyes in fear. Children waved. Merchants bowed with genuine respect rather than terrified obligation. The kingdom was learning that their Shadow King was not a monster but a man. A man who loved his people enough to cage himself rather than risk harming them. But not everyone was pleased with this change. In the shadows, Lord Malachar worked tirelessly to undermine the growing support for Theron. He held secret meetings with the most traditional members of the council, planting seeds of doubt. "The curse is still there," he would whisper. "It hasn't gone away. The girl has simply distracted him from it. What happens when the novelty wears off? What happens when he loses control again, and this time there's no one to pull him back? The entire kingdom could be destroyed." Some of the alphas listened. Others remained skeptical but uncertain. The council was fracturing, divided between those who saw hope in the king's transformation and those who still believed the old ways were best. Malachar needed something concrete, something undeniable to turn the tide fully in his favor. And he knew exactly where to find it. Deep in the castle's archives, buried beneath centuries of dust and forgotten histories, lay the original texts about the shadow curse. The bargain Theron's ancestor had made, the true nature of the dark spirit and, most importantly, the curse's one unbreakable law. Malachar had studied these texts in secret for years, searching for a way to use the curse against Theron. And he had found it. A loophole, a weakness that even Theron himself didn't know about. The curse could never be truly controlled. It could be suppressed, managed, even tamed for a time. But it would always hunger for one thing above all else: the life force of someone the cursed individual loved. That was why physical touch was so dangerous. Not because it might hurt the other person, but because the curse would actively seek to consume them, to drain their essence to feed its insatiable hunger. Every moment Theron spent with Elara, every touch they shared, brought her closer to death. The curse was patient. It would wait, building its strength, and when the moment was right, it would strike. And there would be nothing Theron could do to stop it. Malachar smiled as he copied the relevant passages onto a fresh scroll. This was perfect. He wouldn't have to kill the girl himself. The curse would do it for him. All he had to do was wait for the inevitable, and then present the evidence to the council. "See," he would say. "See what happens when you allow sentiment to override caution? The Shadow King has doomed his own mate. How long before he dooms us all?" He rolled up the scroll carefully, tucking it into his robes. So, very soon, everything would fall into place. In the garden, Elara hummed contentedly as she worked. The roses were in full bloom now, their perfume filling the air with sweetness. The herb beds were lush and green, and the conservatory was a wonderland of exotic plants from every corner of the kingdom. She heard footsteps on the path and looked up to see Theron approaching. He had started joining her in the garden in the afternoons, helping with the heavier work, moving stones, repairing trellises. He claimed it was because he needed the exercise, but she knew the real reason. He was learning to be comfortable in his own skin again, learning to exist in the world without fear. "You're early," she said, smiling. "Finished with the council meeting early," he replied, rolling up his sleeves. Malachar was being even more insufferable than usual, so I dismissed everyone. What was he complaining about now? The usual. How I'm being too soft on the rogues, how we need to show strength, how... He stopped, his expression darkening. "How you're a distraction." Elara set down her trowel. "Am I?" "No," he said firmly. "You're the opposite. You're the only thing keeping me focused, keeping me grounded." He moved closer, taking her dirt-stained hands in his. "I don't know what I would do without you now." She leaned up and kissed him, gentle and sweet. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. The shadows swirled around them, but they were calm, content. Like a cat purring in the sun. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I know you're not ready to say it yet, and that's okay. But I wanted you to know." He pulled back slightly, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. "I do love you," he said, and his voice was wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe it himself. "I think I started falling in love with you the first day I saw you in this garden, covered in dirt and refusing to give up on a dying rosebush. You're the bravest, strongest person I've ever known. And you're mine." "Yours?" she agreed, smiling. They kissed again, deeper this time, and neither of them noticed the figure watching from a high window. Lord Malachar's expression was cold and calculating as he made notes on his scroll. "The bond is deepening," he wrote. "The curse will feed soon. 2 months. 3 at most. When it strikes, make sure to be present. Document everything." He turned away from the window, a satisfied smile on his face. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness for both Theron and Elara. They were inseparable, spending every possible moment together. They took long walks through the forest surrounding the castle. They had picnics by the mountain streams. They lay in the garden and watched the stars, Theron pointing out constellations and telling her the old legends associated with each one. The castle staff watched this transformation with joy and wonder. Their king was smiling, laughing, living. And their queen, their strange, wonderful, wolfless queen, was the cause of it all. But there were signs, small at first, that something was wrong. Elara began to tire more easily. She would need to sit down after working in the garden for just an hour, whereas before she could spend entire afternoons there without pause. She developed headaches that came and went without warning. Her appetite decreased. She told herself it was nothing, just the stress of her new position catching up with her. But deep down she felt something changing, something shifting in the very fabric of her being. Theron noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her. "You're pale," he would say, concern creasing his brow. "Are you feeling well?" "I'm fine," she would assure him, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But he wasn't convinced. He summoned the castle's healer, an ancient she-wolf named Moira who had served 3 generations of kings. Moira examined Elara thoroughly, her wizened face growing more and more troubled as the examination progressed. Finally she pulled Theron aside. "My king," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." They went to his study, leaving Elara resting in her chambers. Moira closed the door carefully before turning to face him. "What is it?" Theron demanded. "What's wrong with her?" "I'm not entirely certain," Moira admitted. "But I've seen something like this before, many years ago. Your great-grandfather's mate, she developed the same symptoms. Fatigue, pallor, loss of appetite. At first we thought it was just normal exhaustion, but then—" She stopped, her expression pained. "Then what?" Theron pressed, though dread was already coiling in his gut. "She died," Moira said bluntly. 3 months after the symptoms started. We never understood what caused it. But now, seeing the same pattern in Queen Elara and knowing about your condition, I fear I understand all too well." Theron felt the world tilt beneath his feet. No, that's not. I've been careful. I've kept control. The shadows. The shadows are not the only manifestation of the curse," Moira interrupted gently. "From what I've read in the old texts, the curse feeds on life force. Specifically, the life force of those the cursed individual cares for. Physical proximity, emotional connection, these things create a conduit. The curse doesn't attack overtly. It drains slowly, subtly, until there's nothing left." "You're saying I'm killing her?" Theron said, his voice hollow. "I'm saying the curse is," Moira corrected. "But yes, my king. If you continue as you are, if you maintain this level of contact with her, she will die. The curse will consume her, defeat itself." Theron staggered back, his hand gripping the edge of his desk. "How long?" "Impossible to say with certainty. Based on what happened with your great-grandmother, 2 to 3 months. Perhaps less if the bond continues to deepen. There has to be a way to stop it," he said desperately. "Some way to break the connection to distance," Moira said sadly. "That is the only way. Complete and total distance. No contact, no interaction. Even being in the same room would allow the curse to continue its work, though at a slower pace. You would have to send her away, my king. Far away. And you would have to stay apart. Forever." The word was a knife to his heart. "I don't know," Moira admitted. "Perhaps, with time, the connection would fade enough that it would be safe. But that could take years. Decades even. Or perhaps never. The texts are unclear." Theron turned away, moving to the window. Outside he could see the garden, Elara's garden, blooming in the afternoon sun. He had finally found happiness, finally found someone who saw him as more than a monster or a crown. And now he had to give her up or watch her die. It wasn't even a choice. "Don't tell her," he said, his voice flat. "Not yet. I need time to figure out how to do this without destroying her in the process." "My king." "That's an order, Moira." The healer bowed her head. "As you command, your majesty." After she left, Theron stood alone in his study, staring out at the garden. The shadows around him were agitated, sensing his turmoil. For the first time in weeks, he felt them pushing against his control, eager to surge forth and destroy everything in their path. He had been a fool. A selfish, stupid fool. He had allowed himself to believe that he could have a normal life, a normal love. But he was cursed, and the curse would take everything from him. It always had. It always would. The only question now was how to let her go without breaking both their hearts in the process. But even as he thought it, he knew the truth. There was no way. Their hearts would break. It was inevitable. The only thing he could control was whether she survived the breaking. Behind him, hidden in the shadows of the corridor outside his study, Lord Malachar smiled. He had heard every word through the door he'd left deliberately ajar. He had suspected Moira would eventually piece together the truth. The old she-wolf was too clever for her own good. But this was even better than he'd hoped. Theron would send the girl away himself. No manipulation needed, no risky plots. The king's own conscience would do Malachar's work for him. And when Theron was alone again, broken and despairing, drowning in guilt and self-loathing, that's when Malachar would strike the final blow. A king so weakened, so consumed by grief would be easy to depose. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Over the next few days, Elara noticed the change in Theron immediately. He withdrew, becoming distant and cold in a way he hadn't been since their early days together. He stopped coming to the garden. He took his meals in his study again. When she brought him his nightly tea, he would barely look at her, accepting the cup with a curt nod and nothing more. The warmth that had been growing between them seemed to freeze over, and Elara felt the loss like a physical wound. "What did I do wrong?" she asked him one evening, standing in the doorway of his study when he refused to let her in. "Please, Theron. Talk to me." "You did nothing wrong," he said, his back to her. "I need space. That's all." "That's not all," she insisted. "Something changed. After Moira examined me, what did she tell you?" "Nothing of consequence." "You're lying," she said, her voice breaking. "I can see it in your eyes. In the way you won't even look at me anymore. What's happening?" He finally turned to face her, and the coldness in his expression made her take a step back. "I made a mistake," he said flatly. "I allowed myself to forget what I am, what I'm capable of. I let my guard down, and that was foolish. This arrangement between us was never meant to be." He gestured vaguely between them. It was meant to be a political marriage. A convenience. Nothing more." "You don't mean that." "I do," he said, and his voice was ice. "You're a means to an end, Elara. A way to appease the council's demands for an heir while maintaining my isolation. But you've become a distraction. A liability. I can't have you constantly hovering, constantly demanding my attention and affection." Each word was a dagger, and she felt them all strike true. "I don't believe you." "I don't care what you believe," he said cruelly. "I am your king, and I'm telling you how things are going to be from now on. You will return to your chambers. You will maintain the appearance of being my queen in public, but you will make no further attempts to intrude on my private time. Is that clear?" Tears streamed down her face, but she held her ground. "What about what we shared? What about—" "A moment of weakness," he interrupted. "Nothing more. Now go. Theron. Go." The shadows exploded around him, lashing at the walls, and she finally fled, her sobs echoing through the corridors. When she was gone, Theron collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. The shadows writhed around him, feeding on his anguish. Every word he'd said to her had been a lie, and every lie had torn another piece from his soul. But it was necessary. She had to hate him. She had to want to leave. Because he was going to send her away, back to her family, back to safety. And she had to go willingly, or she would fight him every step of the way. If she thought he didn't care for her, if she thought she meant nothing to him, then maybe, she would agree to leave without too much resistance. It was the only way to save her life. Even if it destroyed his in the process. Elara spent the next 3 days locked in her chambers, refusing to see anyone. She didn't eat, didn't sleep. She just lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Theron's words over and over in her mind. A means to an end. A distraction. A liability. Had it all been a lie? Had his affection, his vulnerability, his declarations of love, had they all been manipulation? Some twisted game to pass the time? No. She couldn't believe that. She had felt his emotions when they touched, had seen the truth in his eyes. He loved her. She knew he did. Which meant something else was happening. Something he wasn't telling her. On the 4th day, she rose from her bed with newfound determination. She was done wallowing. She was done accepting his words at face value. If Theron wouldn't tell her the truth, then she would find it herself. She sought out Moira, finding the old healer in her workroom, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. "Your Majesty," Moira said, surprised. "I didn't expect. You should be resting." "I need you to tell me the truth," Elara said without preamble. "What did you tell the king after you examined me? What made him change?" Moira's expression shuddered. "I cannot say, Your Majesty. The king forbade me." "I don't care what the king forbade," Elara interrupted. "I'm dying, aren't I? That's what this is about." The healer's silence was answer enough. "Tell me," Elara demanded. "I have a right to know." Moira set down her mortar with a heavy sigh. "You're not dying. Not yet. But you will, if things continue as they have been. The curse. Yes. It feeds on the life force of those the cursed individual bonds with. The physical contact, the emotional connection, they create a conduit. The curse drains you slowly, so slowly you barely notice. But eventually it will kill me, Elara finished. She felt oddly calm, as if she had always known on some level that this was coming. How long do I have? If you maintain close contact with the king? 2 months. Perhaps 3. If you separate completely, Moira hesitated. The texts are unclear. You might recover. Or the damage might already be done. There's no way to know. And that's why he's pushing me away, Elara said, understanding dawning. He thinks he can save me by making me leave. He's trying to protect you, Your Majesty. He's an idiot, Elara said, but there was no heat in the words. Only a bone-deep sadness. Does he really think I would choose a life without him? That I would rather live decades alone than spend whatever time we have left together? You should want to live, Moira said gently. Any sane person would choose life. Then perhaps I'm not sane, Elara replied. She moved to the window, looking out at the garden she had nurtured back to life. My whole existence has been defined by what I'm not. Not a proper wolf. Not strong enough. Not worthy. And then I came here, and for the first time I found purpose. I found belonging. I found love. And now you're asking me to give that up, to go back to being nothing, just to preserve a body that would only hold a hollow, broken shell. Your Majesty. No, Elara said firmly. I've made my choice. I'm staying. And I'm going to fight this curse with everything I have. If it wants my life force, it's going to have to take it. I won't surrender it willingly. You can't fight a curse, Moira said sadly. No one can. Maybe not, Elara agreed. But I can try. And I'd rather die trying than live knowing I gave up on the person I love most in this world. She left the healer's workroom with her head held high, her resolve crystallized. She had a plan forming in her mind. Risky, probably foolish, but it was the only chance she could see. If the curse fed on life force, on emotional connection, then maybe she could turn that against it. Maybe instead of fleeing from the connection, she could embrace it fully. Strengthen it until it was too powerful for the curse to corrupt. It was a gamble. A dangerous one. But she had been underestimated her entire life. Let the curse make the same mistake. She went to the castle's library, the vast room filled with ancient texts and forgotten knowledge. If there was an answer, it would be here. She spent hours poring over dusty tomes, reading about the shadow curse and its history. Most of what she found was discouraging. Accounts of cursed kings dying alone and miserable, their loved ones either fleeing or perishing. But then, buried in a text so old its pages were crumbling, she found something different. A single paragraph almost overlooked. The shadow feeds on fear, on separation, on the spaces between souls. But there is a force it cannot consume, a light it cannot extinguish. True love, freely given and fully embraced, forms a bond stronger than any curse. If two souls merge completely, if they become as one, the shadow has nothing to feed upon, for it cannot devour itself. Elara read the passage 3 times, her heart racing. It was vague, almost poetic in its language. But it hinted at a possibility, a way forward. If she and Theron could complete their mating bond fully, if they could merge their souls entirely, then the curse would have no separate life force to drain. They would be one entity, and the curse could not consume its own host. The risk was enormous. If she was wrong, if the text was merely metaphorical and not literal, then completing the bond would only accelerate her death. But if she was right, they could both be free. She tucked the ancient book under her arm and made her way to Theron's study. She didn't knock, just pushed the door open and strode inside. He was at his desk, bent over correspondence. He looked up sharply, his expression hardening. I thought I made myself clear. I know about the curse, she interrupted. I know what it's doing to me. And I know why you're pushing me away. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. Then you understand why you need to leave. I'll make arrangements for you to return to your family. I'm not leaving. You have to, he said desperately. If you stay, you'll die. The curse will drain you until there's nothing left. Maybe, she acknowledged. Or maybe there's another way. She set the ancient book on his desk, open to the passage she had found. Read this. He scanned the text, his expression skeptical. This is poetry, not fact. A romantic notion with no basis in. You don't know that, she insisted. No one's ever tried it. Every cursed king before you did exactly what you're doing now. They pushed away the people they loved, maintained distance, died alone. But what if that's the wrong approach? What if isolation is exactly what the curse wants? It's too dangerous, he said, but she could hear the longing in his voice, the desperate hope he was trying to suppress. Living is dangerous, she countered. Loving is dangerous. But I would rather risk everything for a chance at happiness than guarantee misery through cowardice. This isn't cowardice, he said sharply. This is. It is, she interrupted. You're so afraid of losing me that you're willing to lose me anyway. That's not protection, Theron. That's fear. And I thought we were past that. He closed his eyes, his jaw clenched. You don't understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to trust me, she said softly. To trust us. To trust that what we have is strong enough to survive anything, even this curse. And if you're wrong? If this doesn't work? Then at least we'll have tried, she said. At least we'll have had this time together. I would rather have 2 months of true happiness with you than 50 years of empty existence without you. He moved around the desk, his hands gripping her shoulders. I can't lose you. Not like I lost them. I can't survive that again. You won't lose me, she promised. But you're losing me anyway by pushing me away. Can't you see that? His resolve was crumbling, she could see it in his eyes. The shadows around him were turbulent, reflecting his inner turmoil. What are you proposing? He asked finally. Complete the mating bond, she said. Fully. No holding back, no barriers. Merge our souls entirely, make us truly one. If the text is right, the curse will have nothing separate to feed on. It will starve. And if it's wrong? Then I'll die anyway, she said bluntly. Whether I stay or go, the curse is already in motion. Moira said the damage might already be done. At least this way there's a chance. A real chance at a future together. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her tightly. I'm terrified, he admitted into her hair. So am I, she confessed. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, drawing strength from their connection. Finally, Theron pulled back slightly, looking down at her with an expression of such profound love and fear that it took her breath away. Are you absolutely certain? He asked. Once we do this, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything, she replied. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she didn't realize she'd been crying. Then we do this. Together. Together? She echoed. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like their previous kisses. This was desperate and claiming, a promise and a plea all at once. The shadows around them surged, but instead of feeling cold and threatening, they felt warm, almost protective. Not here, he murmured against her lips. This needs to be done properly. Ceremonially. The blood moon is in 3 days, she said. The night Malachar plans to make his move against you. Theron's eyes hardened. Then we'll give him a show he'll never forget. Let him challenge me in front of the entire kingdom. And let them all witness what true power looks like, not the power of fear and domination but the power of love and unity. He won't take this well, Elara warned. Let him rage, Theron said. By the time the ceremony is done, it won't matter. Either we'll be bonded completely, stronger than ever, or... Don't, she said, pressing her fingers to his lips. Don't finish that sentence. We're going to succeed. I can feel it. He kissed her fingers, then her palm, then pulled her close again. 3 days, he said. 3 days to prepare. And then we'll face whatever comes together. Together, she agreed. They spent the next 3 days in a flurry of preparation. Word spread quickly that the king and queen would be completing their mating bond at the blood moon ceremony. The news was met with mixed reactions. Joy from the common folk who had seen the positive changes in their king, and consternation from the more traditional members of the council. Lord Malachar was apoplectic. His carefully laid plans were unraveling. If the bond completed successfully, if the girl somehow survived, which he couldn't imagine possible given what he knew of the curse, then Theron would be stronger than ever and Malachar's window of opportunity would close forever. He called an emergency council meeting, demanding an audience with the king. This is madness, Malachar declared when the council assembled. You know what the curse does to those you bond with. You're signing her death warrant. I'm aware of the risks, Theron said calmly. But it's not your decision to make. It's ours. You're condemning her to death out of selfish desire, Malachar accused. What kind of king sacrifices his queen to satisfy his own needs? The kind who trusts his queen to make her own choices, Elara interjected, speaking up from her throne. I'm not a child, Lord Malachar. I'm not property. I am a grown woman capable of making my own decisions about my life and my future. And I choose this. You choose death. Malachar sneered. I choose love, she corrected. And if you cannot understand the difference, then I pity you. Several of the alphas shifted uncomfortably. Malachar was losing ground and he knew it. He needed a different approach. Very well, he said, his tone deceptively mild. If you are determined to proceed with this foolishness, then I invoke the ancient rights. I challenge the king's authority and his right to rule. A shocked murmur ran through the council. A formal challenge hadn't been issued in over a century. You challenge me? Theron said, his voice dangerously soft. On what grounds? On the grounds that you are unfit to rule, Malachar declared. That your curse makes you a danger to this kingdom. That your obsession with this wolfless girl has compromised your judgment. I challenge you for the throne, to be decided by ritual combat at the blood moon ceremony. The council erupted in shouts and arguments. Some of the alphas supported Malachar's right to challenge, while others condemned it as treachery. Through it all, Theron sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Finally he raised a hand and silence fell. I accept your challenge, uncle, he said quietly. 3 days hence, at the blood moon ceremony, we will settle this once and for all. But know this, when I win, and I will win, you will be exiled from this kingdom forever. You will die alone in the wilderness with no pack and no name. That is the price of your ambition. Malachar smiled coldly. And when I win, your precious queen will be mine to do with as I please. Starting with a public execution for witchcraft. Elara felt ice run through her veins, but she kept her expression calm. Then it's fortunate you won't win. The council meeting dissolved into chaos, but the challenge had been issued and accepted. There was no going back now. That night, Elara and Theron lay together in his chambers, not touching beyond holding hands, not wanting to accelerate the curse's effects before the ceremony. The shadows around them were quiet, almost contemplative. Are you afraid? She asked softly. Terrified, he admitted. Not of Malachar. He's strong, but I'm stronger. I'm afraid of what happens during the bonding, she finished. Yes. If something goes wrong, if the curse. It won't, she insisted. I can feel it, Theron. This is right. This is what we're meant to do. Your faith in me is humbling, he said. It's not just faith in you, she corrected. It's faith in us. In what we've built together. You're not the same man you were when I arrived here. Neither of us is the same. We've changed each other, made each other stronger. And that strength is going to carry us through this. He turned his head to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. How did I get so lucky? You didn't, she said with a small smile. You made a calculated choice to select the weakest, most forgettable girl possible. You just didn't count on her being stubborn. He laughed, the sound warming her from the inside out. A grievous tactical error on my part. The worst, she agreed, squeezing his hand. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. Tomorrow, I want to visit my family, Elara said suddenly. Before the ceremony. Just in case. Don't, he said firmly. Don't think like that. I have to, she insisted gently. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. If something does go wrong, I want them to know, I want them to hear from me, that I made this choice freely. That I died, she stopped, correcting herself. That whatever happens, it was because I chose love over fear. He brought their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. Then we'll go together. At first light. The next morning, they rode out to the edge of the territory where Elara's family lived. It was a humble cottage, made even more so by comparison to the grandeur of the castle. When they approached, Elara's father emerged, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of his daughter and the king. Elara, he said, his voice uncertain. We didn't expect. I came to see you, she said, dismounting. To talk to you. All of you. Her sister Mirabelle appeared in the doorway, her silver wolf shimmering beneath her skin. Elara? What's wrong? Has something happened? No. Nothing's wrong. Elara paused, gathering her thoughts. I just wanted to see you before the ceremony. To tell you that I'm happy. That despite everything, despite how this all started, I found something precious. Someone precious. Her father looked at Theron, still mounted on his horse, shadows swirling gently around him. You're here to complete the mating bond. Yes, Elara confirmed. Even knowing what it might cost you? Mirabelle asked, stepping forward. We've heard the rumors, Elara. About the curse. About what happens to those the king bonds with. I know the risks, Elara said. And I'm proceeding anyway. Her father's expression was difficult to read. For so long she had seen only disappointment in his eyes. But now there was something else. something that might have been pride. You were always different, he said finally. From the time you were small. Where others saw weakness, you saw opportunity. Where others saw impossibility, you saw challenge. I thought that was a flaw. That it would only bring you pain. He stepped forward, his hand hovering near her shoulder as if he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure if he should. I was wrong. It's not a flaw. It's your greatest strength. And I'm sorry I never told you that before. Tears streamed down Elara's face as she embraced her father, feeling his arms close around her for the first time in years. Thank you, she whispered. Mirabelle joined the embrace, and for a moment, Elara was surrounded by family, by love, by the acceptance she had craved her entire life. When they finally pulled apart, Mirabelle pressed something into Elara's hand, the wooden bird she had given her all those months ago. For luck, Mirabelle said. Not that you'll need it. You're the strongest person I know. Elara clutched the small carving, memories flooding through her. She had come so far from the frightened girl who had left this cottage. She had found her purpose, her strength, her love. Whatever happened at the blood moon ceremony, she was ready. The night of the blood moon ceremony arrived, cloaking the mountains in a crimson glow. The entire kingdom had gathered in the grand amphitheater, a vast open-air circle of stone carved into the mountainside. Torches burned brightly, casting flickering shadows that danced like frantic spirits. The air was thick with tension and the musky scent of thousands of wolves. Elara stood in the preparation chamber beneath the amphitheater, dressed in a gown of deep midnight blue that seemed to shimmer with starlight. It was the traditional garb for a queen about to complete her mating bond, a symbol of the night sky, eternal and unchanging. Brielle and several other maids fussed around her, adjusting the gown, braiding her hair with silver threads. But Elara barely noticed them. Her mind was focused on what was to come. The door opened and Theron entered. He was dressed in black ceremonial armor, ancient runes etched into the metal. The shadows around him were calm but present, a living cloak that marked him as different, as other. The maids quickly curtsied and fled, leaving them alone. Are you ready? He asked, moving to stand before her. Yes, she said without hesitation. You? As I'll ever be. They stood facing each other, and Elara could see the fear in his eyes, the desperate hope, the love. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. Whatever happens, she said, I want you to know, this has been the greatest adventure of my life. You gave me purpose, belonging, love. You made me whole. And I will never regret a single moment of it. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You saved me, Elara. In every way a person can be saved. If this works, when this works, I will spend the rest of our lives showing you just how much you mean to me. I'm holding you to that, she said with a watery smile. A horn sounded above them, its deep note resonating through the stone. It was time. Hand in hand, they ascended the stairs to the amphitheater floor. The crowd's roar washed over them as they emerged, but Elara barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the center of the arena, where a raised platform awaited them. And standing before it, arms crossed and expression triumphant, was Lord Malachar. Beautiful soul, if you have walked this journey with Elara and Theron, if their love has awakened something fierce and tender within your own heart, then stay with us now, for the moment of truth has arrived. What unfolds in this blood-soaked moonlight will determine not just their fate, but the future of an entire kingdom. The ceremony that will either unite them forever or tear them apart is about to begin, and every second that follows will leave you breathless. Subscribe now and witness the culmination of everything we've fought for. The shadows are gathering, the moon is rising, and destiny waits for no one. Join us for the final act, where love will either conquer all, or consume everything. Theron and Elara walked toward the platform, their steps measured and deliberate. The crowd parted before them, a sea of faces watching with rapt attention. Some looked hopeful, others fearful, but all were utterly captivated. Lord Malachar stepped forward, his voice booming across the amphitheater. Before the mating bond can be completed, the challenge must be resolved. King Theron stands accused of being unfit to rule, of allowing his curse to compromise his judgment and endanger his people. I, Lord Malachar, issue formal challenge for the throne. The traditional words had been spoken. There was no going back. Theron released Elara's hand and stepped forward to face his uncle. I accept your challenge, he said, his voice carrying across the vast space. But let us be clear about what we fight for. You claim to fight for the kingdom's safety. But in truth you fight for power, for control. You have manipulated and schemed for years, waiting for your moment to seize the throne. Tonight that ends. Big words from a cursed king, Malachar sneered. We'll see if you can back them up. The two men moved to the center of the arena. The rules of ritual combat were simple and brutal. No weapons, no aid, shifter forms allowed. The fight continued until one combatant yielded or died. A horn sounded and they began. Malachar shifted immediately, his form rippling and changing into a massive gray wolf, easily twice the size of a normal shifter. He had always been powerful, one of the strongest alphas in the kingdom. He lunged at Theron with frightening speed, jaws snapping. But Theron didn't shift. Instead, the shadows around him exploded outward, forming a barrier that Malachar slammed into. The wolf yelped and fell back, shaking his head. That's your plan? Malachar's voice came from the wolf's throat, distorted but understandable. Hide behind your curse? No, Theron said calmly. My plan is to show everyone exactly what I am. No more hiding. No more shame. He closed his eyes and the shadows surged. But unlike in the council chamber, unlike every other time she had seen them, these shadows were different. They were controlled, purposeful. They formed into solid shapes, hands, weapons, shields. Theron was wielding them with precision, turning his greatest weakness into his greatest strength. Malachar attacked again, this time from the side. But a shadow tendril wrapped around his leg, yanking him off balance. Another struck his flank, sending him tumbling. The old wolf was strong, but Theron was stronger, and more importantly, he was finally accepting what he was. The fight was brutal and swift. Malachar landed a few hits, his teeth tearing into shadow constructs that reformed instantly. But Theron was relentless, his shadows pressing the attack from all sides. Finally, with a powerful surge, he pinned Malachar to the ground, shadow tendrils wrapping around the wolf's legs and throat. Yield, Theron commanded. Malachar shifted back to human form, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. Never. Kill me if you dare, but I will not. I don't need to kill you, Theron interrupted. That's what you've never understood. True strength isn't about domination or death. It's about knowing when mercy is the greater power. He released Malachar and stepped back. The crowd gasped. You are exiled, Theron declared. As I promised, you have until dawn to leave the kingdom. If you are found within our borders after that, the sentence is death. Now go. Malachar staggered to his feet, his expression one of pure hatred. But he was beaten and he knew it. With one last venomous glare at Elara, he limped from the arena. Guards fell in behind him, ensuring he would leave as commanded. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Theron ignored them. He walked back to Elara, taking her hands in his. Now, he said softly. Now we finish this. Together. They climbed the steps to the raised platform, where an ancient she-wolf waited. The kingdom's high priestess, keeper of the old rituals. She was draped in ceremonial robes, her eyes milky with age but still sharp with understanding. King Theron. Queen Elara, she intoned. You come before the moon goddess to complete your bond. You understand the risks? The permanence. We do, they said in unison. Then let the ceremony begin. The priestess began to chant in the old language, words that had been spoken for thousands of years. She took Theron's hand and Elara's hand, binding them together with a silk cord. As the moon waxes and wanes, as the seasons turn, as life and death dance their eternal dance, so too do two souls seek to become one. What the goddess joins, let no force tear asunder. She produced a ceremonial blade, its edge gleaming in the moonlight. Blood to blood, soul to soul, two become one. She drew the blade across Theron's palm, then Elara's. They clasped their hands together, their blood mingling. The moment their blood touched, everything changed. Elara gasped as she felt Theron's emotions flood through her. His love, his fear, his desperate hope. But more than that, she felt the curse itself, coiled in his soul like a living thing. It was ancient and hungry, a darkness that fed on separation and fear. And it was reaching for her, sensing fresh prey. She felt it begin to drain her life force, felt her energy flowing into that bottomless void. This was what had killed Theron's parents, what would have killed her eventually. It was insatiable. But Elara didn't flee from it. Instead, she reached back, opening herself completely to the connection. She poured her love into Theron, her acceptance, her unwavering faith. She showed him her memories, of first seeing him in the courtyard, of working in the garden, of bringing him tea, of walking into the storm of shadows because she trusted him absolutely. And something extraordinary happened. The curse, reaching for her life force, found not a separate being to drain but a part of itself. Because she and Theron were becoming one entity, one soul split between two bodies. The curse couldn't consume her without consuming its host. It was caught in a paradox, unable to feed. And in that moment of confusion, Elara struck. She wasn't a fighter, wasn't a warrior. But she had spent months nurturing life in a dead garden. She understood growth, understood how to take something small and fragile and help it flourish. She took that same principle and turned it inward, directing it at the curse itself. You are not separate, she told it. You are not other. You are part of him, and he is part of me, and I am part of him. We are one. You cannot destroy us without destroying yourself. The curse raged, thrashing against the bonds of logic and reality. But it was ancient magic, bound by ancient rules. And those rules said it could not consume its own host. Slowly, inch by inch, Elara felt the curse's grip weakening. The shadows around them, the physical manifestation of the curse, began to change. They were no longer black and threatening but silver, luminous. They were transforming, becoming something new. Theron felt it too. The burden he had carried for so long, the weight that had crushed him, was lifting. The curse was still there, it would always be there, but it was no longer in control. It was just power, neutral and waiting to be directed. They were doing it. The impossible was happening. But then, just as victory seemed assured, something went wrong. Malachar, who should have been escorted from the grounds, burst back into the amphitheater. In his hands he clutched the obsidian shard, the forbidden artifact he had used before. His face was contorted with rage and madness. If I cannot have the throne, then no one will, he screamed. He raised the artifact, and a beam of sickening purple energy shot toward the platform. But it wasn't aimed at Theron. It was aimed at Elara. Time seemed to slow. Theron saw the beam coming, saw the death meant for his mate. Every instinct screamed at him to protect her, to shield her with his body. But they were in the middle of the bonding ceremony, their souls intertwined, their blood mingled. If he broke the connection now, the incomplete bond would tear them both apart. He had to choose, save Elara now and doom them both, or complete the bond and pray they would be strong enough to survive. Elara saw the same calculation flash through his eyes. She felt his anguish through their connection, felt him preparing to sacrifice himself for her. No, she sent through their bond. Trust the ceremony. Trust us. The purple beam struck Elara directly in the chest. She cried out, her body convulsing. The curse's energy, for that's what the artifact channeled, pure concentrated curse energy, poured into her. It should have killed her instantly. Should have consumed her life force in seconds. But she wasn't separate anymore. She and Theron were one soul, one being. The curse energy flowed into her and immediately into him, and from him back into her, creating a circuit. It had nowhere to go, no separate life to drain. Instead, it was caught in an endless loop between them. And something miraculous happened. The foreign curse energy collided with Theron's innate curse, and instead of amplifying each other, they began to cancel out. Like two waves meeting and creating stillness, the curses neutralized each other. The shadows around Theron blazed with silver-white light. The darkness that had plagued his bloodline for 7 generations was burning away, consumed by its own reflection. Elara felt the curse inside him unraveling, felt the ancient bonds breaking one by one. Malachar stood frozen, watching in horror as his final gambit backfired spectacularly. The artifact in his hands cracked, then shattered, its fragments turning to dust. The priestess's chant reached its crescendo. 2 souls, 1 heart. 1 heart, 1 destiny. What was broken is now whole. What was cursed is now blessed. By the light of the blood moon, I declare this bond complete. A wave of pure, radiant energy exploded outward from the platform, washing over the entire amphitheater. Those who were touched by it felt their own wounds healing, their own burdens lightening. It was as if the universe itself was celebrating this victory of love over fear, of unity over separation. When the light faded, Theron and Elara stood hand in hand on the platform. They were both glowing faintly, their bodies surrounded not by shadows but by a gentle, silvery luminescence. The curse was gone. After 7 generations, the shadow curse had finally been broken. Theron looked at his hands, seeing them free of shadows for the first time since he was 16. He felt lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He turned to Elara, his eyes shining with tears. "You did it," he breathed. "You actually did it." "We did it," she corrected, cupping his face in her hands. "Together." He kissed her then, and the crowd roared its approval. But neither of them heard it. They were lost in each other, in the miraculous bond they had forged, in the future that stretched bright and endless before them. When they finally broke apart, Theron turned to address the crowd. His voice rang out clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "People of the kingdom," he said, "you have witnessed something extraordinary tonight. Not just the breaking of an ancient curse, but the triumph of a new way of thinking. For too long we have defined strength by power alone, by the ability to dominate and destroy. But true strength lies in courage, in compassion, in the willingness to be vulnerable. My queen has taught me this. She walked into darkness without fear, not because she was strong enough to fight it, but because she believed in something stronger than darkness, love." He looked down at Elara, his expression tender. "From this day forward, our kingdom will be built on these principles. We will value all forms of strength, not just the strength of claw and fang. We will honor the healers and the gardeners, the teachers and the dreamers. We will be a kingdom where even the wolfless have a place, where even the cursed can find redemption." The crowd erupted in cheers so loud they seemed to shake the mountains themselves. Even the most traditional alphas who had initially supported Malachar were moved by what they had witnessed. Change was coming to the kingdom and it was undeniable. But there was still one loose end to tie up. Guards dragged Malachar forward, forcing him to his knees before the platform. He looked diminished, defeated, his grand schemes reduced to ashes. "Lord Malachar," Theron said, his voice cold, "you have conspired against your king. You have used forbidden artifacts to cause harm. You have betrayed every oath you ever swore. The sentence for such crimes is death." The crowd fell silent, waiting. "However," Theron continued, "I will not become the monster you always claimed I was. I will not rule through fear and bloodshed. You are hereby stripped of your title, your lands, and your name. You will be exiled to the barren peaks, where you will live out your remaining days alone, with nothing but your bitterness and your failures for company. Guards, remove him from my sight." As Malachar was dragged away, still sputtering with impotent rage, Theron turned back to Elara. The ceremony was complete, but their new life together was only beginning. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom underwent a transformation as dramatic as the one its king had experienced. The castle, once a cold and forbidding place, became a hub of life and activity. Elara's gardens expanded, becoming not just a personal project but a kingdom-wide initiative. She taught others her gift of nurturing life, and soon gardens were springing up throughout the realm. The harsh laws were softened. Those who were wolfless or had other differences were no longer shunned but welcomed, their unique gifts recognized and valued. Schools were established to teach not just fighting and hunting, but also healing, farming, and the arts. Theron, free of the curse for the first time in his life, blossomed into the king he was always meant to be. He was wise, just, and compassionate. He walked among his people without fear, and they loved him for it. The Shadow King became known as the Silver King, named for the gentle glow that still surrounded him, a remnant of the transformation he had undergone. But more than anything, he was simply happy. He had Elara by his side, their bond strong and unbreakable. They ruled together, two halves of a whole, making decisions jointly and supporting each other through every challenge. 6 months after the blood moon ceremony, Elara stood in the castle garden, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. The child growing inside her was strong and healthy, a perfect blend of her quiet magic and Theron's transformed power. The healers said it would be a boy, and they had already chosen a name. Aaron, meaning berry in the old tongue, something small that grows into something magnificent. Theron came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his hands over hers on her belly. "He's active today," she said, smiling as she felt the baby kick. "Takes after his mother," Theron murmured, kissing her neck. "Stubborn and determined." "I was thinking he takes after his father," she countered. "Powerful and dramatic." They laughed together, a sound that had become common in the castle. The staff no longer tiptoed around in fearful silence. There was music in the halls, laughter in the courtyards, life everywhere. "Do you ever regret it?" Theron asked suddenly. "Giving up the possibility of a safe, quiet life for all this chaos?" Elara turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "Not for a single moment. This chaos, as you call it, is everything I ever dreamed of and more. I was never meant for a quiet life, Theron. I was meant for this. For you. For us." "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now, no longer weighted with fear or shame. "I love you too," she replied. "Always." They stood there in the garden, surrounded by blooming roses and the gentle hum of bees, the Silver King and his wolfless queen. They had overcome impossible odds, had transformed curse into blessing, had proven that love truly could conquer all. But their story was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. In the distance, a wolf howled, not in mourning or warning but in joy. The kingdom answered, hundreds of voices joining in harmony, a song of hope and new beginnings. The Shadow King had found his light. The Wolfless girl had found her strength. And together they had built something that would endure for generations to come. A kingdom where everyone, no matter how different or broken they seemed, could find their place. Where love was the greatest power of all. Years passed, and the story of Theron and Elara became legend. Parents told their children how a wolfless girl had tamed the shadows, how she had walked into darkness and emerged with light. How she had taught a cursed king that isolation wasn't strength, but that true power came from connection, from vulnerability, from love. The kingdom prospered under their rule. The barren peaks to the north were reclaimed and made fertile again, the rogues who lived there welcomed back into the fold with open arms. Trade flourished with neighboring kingdoms, who had heard tales of the realm where even the broken could be made whole. Aaron grew into a fine young man, wise beyond his years. He had his mother's gift for nurturing life and his father's ability to command the silvery light that was the curse transformed. But more than that, he had their compassion, their strength, their unwavering belief in the power of love and redemption. When he was old enough to understand, they told him the full story of his parents' journey, the pain, the fear, the impossible choice they had made. And he understood that he was not just the heir to a throne, but the heir to a legacy of courage. On the 20th anniversary of the Blood Moon ceremony, the kingdom held a grand celebration. People came from far and wide to honor their king and queen, to celebrate the peace and prosperity they had brought. Theron and Elara stood on a balcony overlooking the festivities, their son beside them and their two younger children, twin daughters named Lyanna and Sarah, playing at their feet. "Do you remember that first day?" Elara asked, leaning her head on Theron's shoulder. "When you told me I was just a placeholder. A means to an end." Theron groaned. "Please don't remind me of my stupidity." She laughed. "You were trying to protect me. In your own misguided, utterly wrong way." "I was an idiot," he admitted. "I thought I could keep you at a distance, keep you safe by keeping you separate. I didn't understand that separation was the real danger. That isolation fed the curse, while connection starved it." "We were both learning," Elara said gently. "I was learning to be brave, to trust my own strength. You were learning that strength doesn't mean bearing everything alone." "You taught me that," he said, turning to look at her. After 20 years together, she still took his breath away. There was silver in her hair now, laugh lines around her eyes, but she was more beautiful to him than ever. "You taught me everything that matters." "And you taught me that I was never wolfless," she replied. "I was just a different kind of wolf. One who fights with love instead of claws, who heals instead of harms." They kissed, a gentle brush of lips that still sent warmth flooding through both of them. Their bond, forged in crisis and tempered by time, was stronger than ever. "Mama, Papa," Aaron called. "They're asking for you to speak." Hand in hand they descended to the crowd. Theron raised his hand for silence, and the thousands gathered fell quiet, waiting to hear from their beloved king. 20 years ago, Theron began, "I stood in an arena and declared that our kingdom would be built on new principles. That we would value courage, compassion, and love above all else. Some doubted. Some feared. But look at what we have built together." He gestured to the crowd, to the diversity of faces looking back at him. Strong warriors standing beside gentle healers, traditional alphas beside those who had once been outcasts. "We are not the same kingdom we were 20 years ago," he continued. "We are better. We are kinder. We are stronger because we understand that true strength comes from unity, not division. From acceptance, not rejection. From love, not fear." Elara stepped forward, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I was once told that I was worthless because I couldn't shift, because I didn't fit the mold of what a wolf should be. But I learned that there are many ways to be strong, many ways to serve, many ways to matter. And I hope that every person in this kingdom, no matter how different they may seem, knows that they have value. That they belong. That they are loved." The crowd erupted in cheers and Elara felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness but of overwhelming joy. She had come so far from the frightened girl in the muddy courtyard. She had found her purpose, her power, her place. And she had found her home. That night, after the festivities had ended and the castle had quieted, Theron and Elara stood together in the garden. Her garden, the one that had started everything. The roses were in full bloom, their perfume heavy on the night air. "Thank you," Theron said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For walking into the darkness when everyone else was running away. For seeing me, truly seeing me when I was at my lowest. For loving me when I couldn't love myself." You would have done the same for me, Elara said. You did do the same for me. You saw value in a wolfless girl when the rest of the world saw nothing. You gave me a chance when no one else would. We saved each other, he said, pulling her close. Yes, she agreed. We did. They stood there in the moonlight, surrounded by the flowers they had nurtured together, the life they had built from ashes. The Shadow King and his wolfless queen, two broken souls who had found each other and become whole. And as the moon rose high overhead, casting silver light across the kingdom, a new generation of wolves howled their joy to the sky. They were the children of a new age, raised in a kingdom where love conquered fear, where differences were celebrated, where even the most broken could be made whole. The curse had been broken. The kingdom had been healed. And love, patient, fierce, unconditional love, had proven once again to be the most powerful force in all creation. The Shadow King's silent queen had spoken, and the whole world had listened. Their story would be told for centuries to come, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, courage over safety. It would inspire countless others to take their own leaps of faith, to walk into their own darkness armed with nothing but hope and trust. Because that's what love does. It transforms. It heals. It redeems. And in the end it always wins. Dear listener, you have walked this entire journey with us, from the shadows into the light. You've witnessed love triumph over an ancient curse, seen courage bloom in the most unlikely heart, and felt the transformative power of acceptance and hope. If this story has touched your soul, if Elara and Theron's journey has awakened something within you, then don't let this connection end here. Subscribe now, because stories like this, stories of redemption and transformation, are what we need in this world. Let us continue to share tales of love conquering darkness, of the broken becoming whole, of whispers becoming roars. Subscribe and join a community that believes in the power of love to change everything. Your journey with us doesn't have to end. In fact, it's only just beginning. Subscribe and let's discover what magic awaits us next. The end.